Hey, kiddo, you awake? Feeling all right? Good, good. Look at this place. There must have been masses of people fleeing right at the beginning. All those voices crying out, those half-finished and scrambled emotions. Where do you go from here?
There you are. Everyone's so busy they got no time for remembering.
I can hear them from time to time. It used to sound like war not so long ago.
I wish you could see this place now. We're really making something out of it.
But what was she doing here in the first place?
What am I doing? This Potochnik is an unknown.
This doesn't make any sense.
I didn't write that bullshit.
I've never used a gun before.
The experience is different every time. Unique, like the shards of a broken window. But they're all like dreams at first, half forgotten and hazy.
This isn't you, it's a thing, it's still active, you know that!
Where the hell is Farid?
Keep running, Joyce. Come on!
Selma, no!
Then it becomes clear and it's like they're right next to you. Isn't that strange? I remember something. A long screaming sound. And an endless silence. That was before I opened my eyes. Before I found you.
Thanks for tuning in, twitch.tv/opnoobsonline. This is the official Twitch channel for Take Two. Take Two.
Hey.
The first 10 minutes were unrecorded. Sorry about
just
that.
Practice, guys. How you doing?
That's how we come in. We're accompanied here by Anton, the developer from Pixel Night Studio, to talk about his recently released game, Empathy Paths of Whispers. It's been out on Steam for just a couple days now, I believe 4 days in total. And Anton was telling us that they're a team of 7 with a second and a third studio across borders with who they've worked in producing and developing this game. Empathy Path of Whispers is an adventure game, and I was just moving on to the very first question of the interview, in which I ask you, Anton, you have in the past described Empathy Path of Whispers as not only a progression from walking simulators like Dear Esther, if some of you are familiar with it, into more interactivity, but also as more story intensive and less confoundingly puzzle filled than Myst. That's the way John Fentiman starts his question simple. How did you balance your desire, Anton, to include engaging puzzles with your desire that the narrative remains feeling fluid and unfragmented? That's a great question.
Well, I mean, for us, from the very beginning, the focus was on narrative. So when we were thinking how to deliver this narrative to the player, it was always a question of not which puzzles we want to have in the game, but which puzzles would actually support the same narrative. So the focus was still always on the narrative, and all the puzzles that exist in the game are there to just help the player along that said narrative. With Empathy, we from the beginning knew that we wouldn't be making a game focused on puzzles. We would be making a game focused on a story and how the player will experience the story. So the balance kind of naturally shifted towards the storytelling from the puzzles, because obviously it's not a game kind of like Myst, as you said, or say The Witness, where there's lots of those small intricate puzzles that the player needs to figure out to just progress. We instead wanted the player to figure out the story to access more areas and new parts of the world. So, I mean, balancing, there was never a desire, that where we were torn between either puzzles and the story. It came natural for us to just focus on the story and then pick along what puzzles naturally fit in that flow.
What type of influence do you guys have coming as a team of 7? What kind of made you want to make this game? What type of a gamer are you, I guess? I'm asking you.
I'm a very picky gamer, to be honest with you. I don't really go usually for mechanics or certain kind of gameplay. I go for a certain kind of experience in games. So for me, the real interesting games is their atmosphere and the world. I can play a certain game just for its atmosphere, regardless of what kind of mechanics it is.
Yes.
It has. So, for example, Stalker or Witcher 3, it's completely different games. I love them both because they both feature a really atmosphere-rich world where you kind of like want to just figure out its mystery and detail, and also mechanics that the games features. They're just helping tools along the way of discovering and understanding the world. So when I play games, I usually go for the games that kind of try to break out from the mold, and it's a requirement for me not to understand the game as soon as I open it. So, sometimes when you boot up certain games, and especially certain MMOs, you directly understand what they're about and what's going to happen. You know that, okay, this guy's going to give me a quest to kill those pigs over there and go get into that town, get my first spell. You feel at home, you know what's going to happen, and personally, I kind of lose interest in. But if I go into a game and it kind of surprises me and I struggle to understand it in a good way, that's kind of the games I usually go for.
What would you say some of the best games in adventure games have been over the last couple of years? You quoted Witcher 3, which I completely agree. For me,
which is as mainstream as it goes, I guess.
Right, yeah. Fallout 4?
Actually, haven't played it that much. I tried getting through the story, but there I stumbled again through the same. It didn't really manage to.
That's because it's funny you said that, because I would say that the difference between Witcher 3 and Fallout 4 in terms of quality is probably atmosphere. And even though obviously the post-nuclear post-apocalyptic, all that stuff like really fares well with gamers in general, at the same time Fallout feels, and that's typical of Bethesda games, feels a lot flatter in terms of ambience. And I don't know if that's got anything to do with the fact that you as a gamer did not really cling on to that one.
I think it had most to do with the fact that Fallout opened up too quickly. It became too much of a free-roaming experience for me, where I kind of felt like, okay, there is so much to do, but it didn't introduce me into its world quick enough for me to have interest for exploring. I mean, it's always fun to free roam and find stuff. I mean, I love exploration, but it didn't engage me into its world with its opening enough for me to keep exploring that world. And there wasn't as clear, strong storyline as it was in The Witcher for me to follow. Because when you get into The Witcher, it kind of like drags you along its story from the get-go. You get dragged into it, into the middle of it, and it's a very strong opening for a game. Fallout allows you more freedom in the way you want to experience the story and in the way you want to experience the world, which resonated less with me than Witcher, I guess.
You're drawing a great contrast, especially considering what we were talking about when it comes to empathy. And the follow-up question to what we opened with was, why did you decide to give players free rein to explore the world and discover the stories themselves rather than linearly dictating the story to them? And I think that connects really well, because you're essentially saying Witcher 3 pulls you into the game through its story very quickly, and yet it isn't linear. It's not a linear game. It's open world at its best. When it comes to empathy, do you feel like you've taken those lessons from CD Red Project and the way they do design, in a way that are you happy with the way your game pulls the players in?
I think when it comes to empathy, we kind of aimed for a more open experience, because when you play some other games that are similar to empathy in this adventure story-driven genre, you're often kind of following a certain path of narration that is set out to, which you do in empathy as well. I mean, there is a certain structure of the levels and the story that the game is laid out, and you can't really break away and completely free roam all of the game from the start. But there is still the kind of mysteries that we wanted to have, allowing the players to experience the stories in their own order. However, the lesson we took from The Witcher is to have a very strong opening, especially in empathy, when you're immediately dragged into the story with the very first scene of the game. Something happens, you see something going wrong, you're getting back to a certain kind of, we don't really want to label it whether it's a flashback or it's in real time, but you get into another room, and then as you try to orient yourself, just figure out what happened, you unlock this door leading to your attic, and just a whole new world opening up for you, which is a really strong opening, and it's a really cool scene, one of my favorites in the game. And that already drags the player into the world, wanting to understand how is this kind of architecture even possible? How can it look this way? Which is the main appeal to reveal the story comes from the opening scene of the game. And then it just allows the player to discover the story of their own way, because I wanted to preserve this sense of exploration in the game, which went lost in many of adventure games where you just follow the story. I want to be there and explore all the Easter eggs, all the hidden secrets, and it kind of rewards more and more you the more of the story you try to find. There's a lot of nuance to the story, which is why we went with pre-roaming, because we want to allow the players to discover and understand the story on their own way.
True. Let's say, Ariana, you're smiling, and this is also a question for, let's say, yourselves as gamers. Do you understand where Anton is coming from, and do you guys feel like that's very much been your experience starting booting up the game?
Yeah, absolutely. Because I mean, just like he was describing with the opening scene of the game, like as soon as you're going into that alternate world, you're just like blasted with this amazing scenery, and especially like trying to figure out like instantly, whoa, I just got blasted into this world. I am like hovering in this thing, and it makes you really go, all right, I want to go forward. I want to see what this is about. And like he was saying, with it not being with the linear, because like most of the time with these kind of games, I find myself like, all right, I'm just running from point to point to point to try to hurry up and get the story going. But as I was exploring, like you said, I'd be heading maybe to a point, and you'd wander off to this other amazing looking little area, and all of a sudden just a new narrative would pop up, and you're like, oh, so now it makes you really want to try to look around and what's going on over there as well. So yeah, absolutely, I got pulled into the story for sure with this, and that narrator is so much fun.
Yes, yeah.
I just like the fact that it's like you felt like you were alone, but then like this narrator would just kind of chime in from time to time, and you're like, oh, we're kind of experiencing this with someone else. I don't want to say a whole lot because it kind of to spoil on down the line, but yeah, I thought that was a nice little touch to have the narrator, and it was fun to have along the trails with me as I was exploring the game.
And the sound quality of that guy who speaks in your ears, if you have one of these bad boys or anything similar of this quality, I mean, the sound quality, Anton, is a professional, mainstream quality. It's mind-blowing that you guys got that done with a small team. Ariana, I don't want to cut you out. You also,
no, it's okay.
What's your reaction to the game's opening?
Oh, I loved it. I don't want to give anything away either. I'm just going to say I enjoyed the narrative. It kind of felt like I was walking into a ghost story, and I really enjoyed it. And like Lacey, I felt alone, and then all of a sudden the narrator would come in, and you're like, oh yeah, I'm not really alone, but you are. So it began to move more quicker in the story once I hit a different area. That beginning area is slow and gets you build up and gets you.
Well, you're still trying to learn the mechanics and what's going on. Yeah.
So that was really nice, and I wanted to get to talk about the ending, but I won't. So
no, you can't. I know
we have more to go.
Yeah, more to go. How did you guys get that quality of sound, Anton? You have a guy that's really good in the studio that makes that happen.
Yes, absolutely. We have a sound engineer on the team named Mikael Andersson.
Yeah, well, hats off to him.
Yeah, he done a really great job of just taking care of all the sound levels and sound quality in the game, because it is quite a challenge to balance everything. So the music comes in right way into the atmosphere, where we opted in to have music mixed with the atmosphere. So we still hear bits of atmosphere as our main tunes, made by Nicola Patricio, our composer, are playing. And we also try to incorporate bits from those main tunes into the background atmosphere. So it's not only natural, it's kind of like musicalic experience that comes in and out all the time. And of course, he done all the sound effects in the game and made sure to remix all the voices so they feel like they fit into the atmosphere or the place they're being played in, because we don't have a general effect on the voices. We have a specific tailored effect depending on where the voice occurs. Whereas it's in a building, it's in a sewer, it's out in the open forest, they have slightly different sound to them.
But essentially, it's
I'm sorry.
No, go ahead.
I was just going to say, at the beginning of the game, one of my favorite things was the thunderstorms. I loved it.
Amazing,
I could
totally.
that.
Yeah, it's
just like the way that
rumbling.
appeared when you looked up and was wandering around. It's like, it was really great. I tended to just kind of like turn my lights off a little bit too and just try to like really get into it. Yeah, because the sound and everything, it really put you in there. It was great. It was very well done there.
And it's quite impressive to find out that it's just one guy behind it. Guy must have been busy. So you guys went full time on this for 3 years, I assume. This is not part time. Like
it varies. I mean, some of the team members weren't full time, such as the composer or actually the sound engineer Azer. We started working part time on the game. Been working on it part time for a while, probably 2 years, and then I went full time. Our programmer invested also lots of full-time weeks into the game in the final months leading up to release. It was mostly really slow-paced development the first year and a half, and then it really picked up the pace during probably the last half a year, where it went from just being simple level mock-ups to actually being full-fledged atmosphere. So the pace really changed there.
Yeah. And it accelerates toward the end when you're like, oh, we actually publicized the launch date on Steam. We probably want. You don't know how many games we see on a weekly basis that get delayed by months. So. Did you guys ever delay the game?
Oh yeah. I can't even imagine all the headaches that must have given the Iceberg. But I mean, originally the game was supposed to come out in. I think it was early 2016 or late 2015. So I think we delayed. Bit over a year, actually.
And sounds about right.
That has to do with many factors. First of all, the game started out as actually a point-and-click game in UDK engine.
And wasn't it third person too, that I read?
Yes.
Yeah,
it was third person, third-person point-and-click game. It already had
that's a major shift in game design in the way you approach that.
It already had
What caused it?
We just felt that the core mechanic of understanding other people and understanding exploring other people's memories and emotions was better utilized in first-person view.
I agree.
And we started to feel drawbacks of UDK as we wanted to have cooler effects and cooler visuals. And when Unreal 4 came out, we thought that, hey, this is a perfect opportunity for us to both shift to a new perspective and update the engine. So we pretty much remade all the code base of the game in late 2014, I think, early 2015. And it's been really good change for us because Unreal 4 is so much more productive, especially for me coming from a design background. It has lots of powerful workflow tools that allow for very modular level and game design in the levels of the game instead of scripting and coding every single feature or interaction from grounds up.
Okay, I've got a hefty question from Fentiman again about UNESCO. UNESCO, if you don't know, UNESCO is the United Nations something.
We don't either, apparently.
It's called UNESCO, United Nations something. And it's an interesting one because he asks you, he basically points out to your game as one that encourages players to experience a world through the eyes of others. And by doing so, come to an understanding understanding of those characters' perspectives and experience. He's pointing out, I'm assuming he's pointing out the transformative nature of video game storylines through characters. And he says that recently UNESCO published a paper that talks about how games provide opportunities for players to experience stories from multiple or even unfamiliar perspectives, as having more potential than even films, TV, and even books to support peace education and conflict resolution. So UNESCO, the United Nations, is pointing at the power of video game as an industry to influence, or maybe not influence, but maybe to educate, to shape the minds, the young minds at heart. It's essentially talking about video game as a positive thing, instead of the usual bias that we experience from mainstream society on a daily basis about what gaming is all about. So his question is, in the context of having made empathy, how strong do you feel that this argument that games have the potential to better than film or books for promoting peace and resolving conflicts? Do you feel like empathy, would you agree with that? Or do you think that video gaming, such as empathy, is a lot more of an evasive mechanism than anything else? Or do you find that video gaming as a whole and adventure games such as yours are really a useful social tool?
Really broad question. Let's start from the beginning. There is that I'm not sure I would agree that one medium is better than the other. They're just so different to each other. I mean, movies are better than games at telling certain kind of story because it's a very confined experience of storytelling. However, games are better than movies in conveying experiences and different kind of immersion as well, which you just can't tell through a movie, because in a movie you're always watching someone else. In a game you experience yourself, so it's a completely different, unique, immersive experience which can teach you something that movies simply are unable to convey. Although at the same time, movies and books are a more strong storytelling medium because they're such restricted and confined without ability of the users to interact. Unless you just rip out some page from a book and ignore it, but that's how often do you do that? But when it comes to promoting peace and resolving conflicts, one of the issues with gaming is its accessibility. It's not as accessible as, say, books or movies, where we still have a lot of catch up to do. Anyone can watch a moving picture and understand it. It's much harder to understand the game, and it's even harder to get actually playing a game. When we were testing empathy on some shows, we had people who almost never played games try it out, and they were struggling to even move around in the game because it's such a foreign concept for them to understand how to navigate a 3D world. Which, to us comes just naturally, just clicks.
Yeah.
I.e.
my mom and my dad.
Yeah.
Yeah.
If you've ever tried with your mom. Mom, you should try this. It's not gonna happen.
You can easily pick up a book or get into movies, that's not a problem. And that accessibility is what
it's true. Yeah, it takes a skill.
Yeah, exactly. And
I have a question on that, Anton. Because you're talking about this, and one of the things I was curious is, what was the background for the game? What was your background? What made you decide to do this particular story?
This particular story, that's a really, really long
I'm throwing
journey.
you for a loop, I know. I do that. That's what I do.
Are you the guy behind the story?
No, we have a dedicated writer, Joachim Kvarnalf. Basically, the idea with the story originally was to take a player on the journey through dying worlds. That was the core concept that we started with. We wanted to showcase the remnants of the world, how, all the kind of beautiful aspects, basically, of a world that's about to begin. And then the story slowly evolved from there. I think it went through probably 3-4 iterations with complete remakes, because we didn't want to tell a certain story a story about subject. We wanted to tell a certain experience, and that experience could have been told through multiple different stories, and we were adapting and seeing what kind of story would fit this experience of trying to convey, and not just the nature of being human, how humans just decide what their motivations are, and that's how we at the end came to the conclusion of empathy's story. So with
it was just really good timing with the political atmosphere today, the things going on in the world. This is a perfect game for right now. It's just something that really hits on how we experience life in so many areas. So I think that's really excellent, and that relates to the question you were saying, Fred, about UNESCO, because they were talking about all the conflicts that are increasing, and how do people in different parts of the world experience this. If they're not there, they don't understand. But a game like this gets people to look at it a little bit different, have that experience.
Yeah,
so it is interesting.
Anton,
yeah, and I mean,
go ahead.
Sorry.
No, go ahead.
I mean, that was our purpose of trying to make the player to consider various conflicts that happen in the various areas of the game, which each has its own unique theme from various perspectives from the characters. What were the motivations? What were the reasons of behaving the way they did? And that's, as you said, it also ties into this to the UNESCO statement that this is absolutely something that can promote resolving conflicts, of making players think and consider things from different angles and try to understand how other people behave. They don't even need to absolutely be convinced, like, this is the way of thinking. That's not what we're trying to do, but rather promote them to give an attempt of just to consider other kind of perspectives of any given matter. And that's absolutely something that games can do better than movies and books, because it's such an immersive interactive experience. For example, Life is Strange, where you're taking on the journey following this teenager. It's just a completely new experience that is really hard to convey through a movie, or especially through a book, because if some people are very resistant to such stuff, you can't really drag them into it through very confined narrative experience such as a movie. It's much easier to ease them into it through gameplay of a game, and allows them to relate to a character by becoming the character.
Before we move on to the last question from the Fentiman, you've already touched on it left and right, sparsely and in depth too, philosophically, but what do you hope, in a single sentence, if you could break that down, what do you hope gamers take with them when they finish this game?
I hope that the gamers will just take with them consideration of human reasoning. To put bluntly, that there is no black and white, there is lots of areas and gray, and how to consider and try to find those gray areas.
Yeah, okay. And then is there kind of an overarching, I wouldn't call it politics, but maybe overarching moral to the story, a position that the studio takes?
Sorry, can you repeat that question?
Is there an overarching moral, an overarching ideal that you guys are taking with the story, a position that the studio has taken that some people might disagree with?
We aren't giving people any answers or political pointers. We are giving them questions, and we are giving them tools to get those questions answered by exploring the story and by giving them food for thoughts. There are, of course, some elements in the story that are part of the characters that some people might disagree with, but it's just characters being themselves and part of the story. It's not something we're telling the players like, this is the way it should be. Instead, we present them with a conflict, we present them with different sides of the conflict, and we allow themselves to make a conclusion about this conflict, given the different presented opinions about it.
That's one thing I really enjoyed. As I was going through the story, I had opinions about some of the characters and trying to figure out what I consider the mystery of what they were doing and why they were doing it. And then as the story went along, I did start feeling a little bit more for them. At first, one of the characters, I'm just going to say Miss Stavinsky, you meet her in the beginning. By the end of it, I was like, wow, this lady is just a troublemaker, and what is she doing? And all this stuff. It was very interesting, and I just loved how I changed from the beginning of it to the end of it regarding some of these characters. It was a great development on that.
Yeah, I mean, that's what we're trying to show too. I mean, when you first meet a character, you have you see only one side of her and one kind of motivation, which forms one kind of opinion about her. But when you later explore the story, you see the underlying motivation to her actions, which might affect your judgment of her, might not. It's up to you how you deem those actions, whether you know it was worth it or it wasn't, whether her decision was right or wrong. We aren't telling the players that, we're just telling the players the facts that this is why she did what she did, and it's up to you as a player to draw a conclusion from her actions. And I mean, the game certainly has a conclusion to its story, of course, because we're not just leaving lots of unanswered questions like what happened to the world, who you are, what you're trying to do. All that is answered, but we aren't really giving definite conclusions to some of the mini stories, because that's not the point. The point is to raise questions and to take the player on a journey through those personal stories, which is enjoyment of their own. And then just to pose those questions, that's basically the goal of the story.
Ariana, you had a couple questions yourself, so go
yeah,
right
I threw
ahead,
them in there.
Please.
Yeah, that was it. That was mostly about how the game came, the background of it. Talked about how you came up with your characters and why maybe their motivation. But it's kind of explained in the game, as you said. You gave background as to why this particular game you wrote, with you like Witcher and those kind of games. So that makes sense. That was a lot of it, the political, why this and that during this time period. So all my questions were answered.
Yeah. Fantastic. Anton, what would you say has been, in terms of development, the toughest challenge? What did you guys really bang your head on the wall about, if anything?
Interesting question. There are a few aspects. I mean, one of the most interesting aspects is the controlled narration, I would say, because it's difficult to take a player on a certain journey in a game, since players are so unpredictable, which we also players just taking completely unexpected paths.
Freely.
Such as we have the bridge tutorial in the beginning of the game, which was a little bit different at the very start, and most of the players thought, okay, I need to repair the bridge. How do I do it? One guy simply walked up to the bridge, jumped over it, and continued his journey.
You can do that?
Yeah, we never tested for players.
Problem solved right there.
But I mean, we never considered such a simple and obvious solution, because we always kind of like, you feel kind of boxed in with your own way of thinking. Okay, this tutorial, I need to solve tutorial because I have those tools. But we never considered just checking if the gap is actually possible to simply jump over, which is of course now fixed. But
that's funny.
Anyway, the biggest
no, it's funny because developers
this like
often
something I would have done, because I am such a shortcut person. Like, I look for it, and I would have been like, well, that doesn't look like that far of a drop, and oh well, okay, yeah, I didn't survive it.
But I think it says something too about, you're developing a game, and every day, every morning you wake up and you work on this for 12, 15 hours and you go back to sleep. So you're completely immersed in your universe. And then that allows you to forget the most basic things, that a gamer is going to burst into your game and just operate completely differently from what you would expect, having been obsessive-compulsive about it.
And I think one of the biggest challenges was the navigation in the game, of a sense of giving a player a sense of direction. This is a very fine balance that we are still looking into fine-tuning based on the feedback we're receiving from the player. But basically we have this radar tools that helps you find the gadgets you need to synchronize with in the world, and there are very peculiar behavior to it that I noticed. For me, it takes maybe 5 or 10 seconds to complete each synchronization, but early in the testing we noticed that some streamers took 2 minutes to complete a single interaction, which was really eye-opening experience for me, because I got so used to it that I never questioned how would it be for a completely new person to try to understand this mechanic, which turned out a lot more of a challenge than it was intended to be. So we ended up quickly fine-tuning that mechanic, and we will be doing additional changes to it. But we also noticed that it really affected the flow of the game. As soon as players had any kind of minimap or any kind of sense of direction.
Yeah.
Some of them simply had it up all of the time and simply followed the
And you didn't want that. You don't want that behavior.
No, because that completely alters
sorry.
The experience of the game.
Like, I'm kind of guilty as one of those people, like, because I'm directionally challenged in my own life. So, like, I need a map.
I missed having a map. I will say that.
I got around just
Gamers
fine,
love
though.
maps.
Like, that little
That's the
device
thing.
does help, you know.
And I mean,
like,
it's an okay experience, but you stumble upon those key story objects more often than intended to. So you kind of just taken through the main story and skipping all the optional parts. So that is something we have learned, that how to better direct the player. And in its earlier interaction, this radar mechanic was slightly different, and it resulted in more of this behavior where players were just following whatever was on their screen. Which is why we decided to make it in the way it is right now. So basically kind of like extra vision. The thing is, you can't just point it and go forward because of the offset. You kind of have to adapt and look around and try to find the object. It's much more interactive in a way than it was in its first iterations of, just being a kind of like guiding minimap. That did not work out. And I think it can certainly still be improved. There's lots of lessons we learn from it. But I also think that it lives up to its current purpose of, helping the players navigate this free roaming experience, because there is simply no way that we could have made it more obvious and still have the free roaming untouched without some sort of minimap or guiding system or markers. You still have them in all of the games. I mean, even Witcher shows you like areas of interest in the game on your map, so you know where to go, and then you can use your Witcher senses to fine-tune certain objects. So that's
well
basically what the gadget is for. It's your Witcher senses, but hopefully people don't be using it.
I did like it because if you cleared an area at the beginning of the game, I thought, okay, I cleared this area, I'm done. But then with that, I knew I had to go back. So that was helpful, very helpful. That helped me progress more quickly.
Yes, and I mean, this kind of backtracking, there's two kind of purposes. Some people like it, some dislike it. The reason it's in the game is, again, to promote this kind of different perspectives. When you return to an area from a completely new perspective and try to understand the thing you've experienced in the same area before, but now from a completely different character, which tells you more from a different view, which is something that we find pretty interesting, just the way you experience the stories in a game, rather than just visiting an area and never coming back to it.
But so, would you say that now that the game is out, you're happy, you're satisfied in terms of a player's behavior and how in sync that is to what you guys wanted player behavior to be?
I think there's certainly some aspects that we can improve on, but it's also pretty much consistent with what we expected. The game has a certain niche market of the players who enjoy exploration and the story. It's not for the players who want action or just being taken along for a ride on a linear story experience, as some other adventure story-driven titles do. And those players who are the target market, they enjoy the way we incorporate the story. But of course, any game can be made more accessible by widening its mechanics to a general audience, which is something we could have done, but we decided to focus on the core audience for the time constraint, budget constraints, you can't make the game appeal to everyone. So I'm certainly satisfied with the core experience of the game, but we are also listening to the feedback and seeing how we can improve also the storytelling in the game.
And before we move on to what you're happiest about, what you're proudest about for the game as a whole, I want to ask Ariana and Asaya, constructive criticism. Is there anything in the game that you as players have experienced that you wish would have been different? And I'm not asking for tough questions here, just some feedback as your experience as a player, some of the things that maybe left you wanting more or wanting something different.
Save game. I mean, I understand you go and it's one But when I quit, it threw me back somewhere else, or if I wanted to try to start over somewhere else, and as a YouTuber and streamer, I also wanted the ability to stop one game, continue playing on my own, and maybe go back and be able to record the other instead of having to starting a new game every time for that. But a save game, that's one thing I think would have been a nice touch.
Have you guys considered that, Anton?
Actually, yeah, we are releasing a patch on Monday for the save mode feature.
There you go, Ariana.
I'm done now, so.
What we realized is that automatic save was working decently, but it was no match for players' curiosity.
Yeah,
there are instances in the game where players found themselves, okay, how did I come here and I can't get out of this place, which is of course unfortunate, and we've fixed most of those locations, but we also realized that no, we simply can't find all the ways that players will explore the games, and the
which is what you want, right? Which is ideally, which is what you want. You want want the player to surprise the developer.
And they absolutely done that in so many ways. I can't even count how the players played and how the players, especially how the QA managed to find different ways to play the game. For example, in the start, it's just a technical limitation where we move the player from one location to another. The feature, we have a feature which resets the player back to their position when they jump off too far and try to, like suicide or whatever. And this feature detected us moving the player from point A in the game's world to point B, where far between, and they thought it was a jump, so the feature teleported the player back to the starting location. We adjusted this by first trying to disable the jumping in this location, and the tester just found another way to break it by jumping, by climbing up on a chair in the room and then dropping from the chair in the exact moment of the teleportation.
They're like toddlers, don't you know? Gamers are like toddlers.
QA done a pretty good job
in the round hole.
Obviously, we adjusted that for the release, but we also found that auto-saving feature is not robust enough for the player's curiosity, so there you have it. Save slot system coming in on Monday to address it.
I mean, okay. And you, Lasea, Ariana's happy. And you, Lasea, any constructive criticism?
That was going to be one of the things I was going to say, because like I am that person, Anton. I'm like, I'm just going to jump off of this right here and land down there. The stairs are there. I'm going to be fine. But I wasn't a lot of the time, or if and I did encounter a couple of times where I found myself stuck somewhere and just couldn't jump out of it or whatever. So I found it kind of put me right back into that spot. So an old save game feature would be nice. And I think for me, and I the first time around when I played it, it made me extremely frustrated. But when I started a fresh playthrough, I got a little bit more handle of it. Was just the puzzle in the mechanic or the machine that you're carrying around itself, because I wasn't quite at first understanding how I was like which turned what direction to get the lines to line up. And since that was kind of the major thing, I found myself getting frustrated, stuck on it for like several minutes at a time and not being able to progress. But I did find the second time around, I was definitely getting a little bit more hang of it, which in the playthrough here, you could see it was taking me about 20-30 seconds once I went okay and started to figure out which line needed to go where. So maybe for me, I would have appreciated, I think, just like a more explanation about like what the AWF stood for, so I wasn't constantly rescrewing my lines back up. But like I said, the second time I played it, I started to actually get the hang of it and was like, well,
And that is one another major point of feedback we've been receiving, is that this kind of mechanic is peculiar for some build, because either you understand it, depending on, maybe you stumbled upon this thing before. It's basically an oscilloscope. It functions in the same way. You have the amplitude, frequency, and wavelength, which those letters stand for, and which is something we should be adding into the description. Funny enough, it's there in the localization. It's not there in the English version of this manual.
Because I was starting to think, like, as you're talking, I'm like, did I just not read something then? Or all right.
No, it's absolutely understandable, and it's something we're continuously looking into, because this mechanic is sometimes a little bit hit and miss with the players, and we are continuously fine-tuning its difficulty. As I told in the beginning of the chat, I got so used to it that to me it came like a second nature, but that was an obvious oversight on our part because we got so used to the mechanic over, using it for months and months that it was hard for us to gauge the difficulty of a new player, how they would understand it. And
I kind of enjoyed it being a bit different from what typically they put in mini games, which is move your mouse to move this thing around here. I like that it was different in that sense.
Well, like once I got the hang of it, I'm like, oh, okay. But I would like the first like hour or so I played, like I got frustrated. I'm like, I'm gonna have to come back to this in a minute. And then when I started a fresh playthrough, and when it started taking me less time, I went, okay, I can appreciate this a little bit more than like Ariana was saying, just throwing something down somewhere and making it fit. But
it's kind of peculiar. Again, you either kind of feel familiar with the mechanic or you feel unfamiliar and frustrated, which is something we want to address to ease the players into it.
I got two final questions for you, Anton. The first one is what are you happiest about? Like what's your proudest achievement? If you could handpick one item, one mechanic, one visual, one something that you're proudest about.
I think it would be the vistas in the game. I mean, it would be actually two items, not one. But it's the opening where you see the statue. I mean, it been the single coolest moment for many of the streamers, where you just shift the atmosphere completely, and it's such a cool
What's the influence on that
statue?
There's obviously there's Greece and antique Greece right there, but what else?
The influence there basically was, if you follow the story, you'll find why those people are up there. But we wanted to separate the people up in the park from the rest of the city. And then kind of became like an obvious solution. Okay, we have this cool atlas holding up the world, and they're building their own small world society in this story part. So, just kind of.
It was a stark difference between the top of Atlas and the down below in the dirty, polluted city area.
And then we have the second vista, which is opening of the mountains, when the players come from this dark and gloomy city. And they come into a completely different environment, which is this lush and ancient mountains, which I'm also quite proud. Yeah, especially the contrast. It's important to play with the contrast in the games, I would say, to just enhance the experience. And this contrast is visible throughout the whole game. Just in the park, you can see in the background of Ariana, where we have the blues and the reds and the oranges, like all kind of contrasting each other. In the next level of the game, it's the warmer colors like orange, and then we have light blue, depending on the theme of the level, and it goes on throughout the entire game, those contrasts.
Well, that's essentially how you create the illusion of depth in a universe.
Well, not only the illusion, I mean, the contrast is there to enhance any certain atmosphere and story that is happening in this place. It's part of the world, and it also helps in navigation, because the levels are larger than the usual story-driven adventure games, and to help them navigate the player, this contrast and unique environments are needed to, know, okay, I'm in this area of the park, or I'm in another area of the park.
Okay, great. The final question is more on the studio than the game. It's what's next. It's the obvious question. It's a bit cliche, but it's always interesting to know what the developers are, in what direction you guys are moving. What's next for Pixel Night, Anton?
Well, right now we're focusing on Empathy, obviously, and we'll be considering porting it to Xbox with some updates to it.
Maybe, sorry, we're PC centric.
Maybe Mac and Linux port as well. We'll have to look into Linux because, well, Linux being Linux, it's not always easy to get games to properly run it. But after Empathy, we will continue into looking into new storytelling titles, but with completely different mechanics this time, because we want to stick to interesting ways of storytelling, but it's not always the more traditional adventure game experience, which is very strict during narrative. It could be a more open, for example, exploration hack and slash title. It could be a platformer, as long as it has this unique storytelling and element to it that our studio is basically about exploring. We want to see how to tell stories and convey experiences in many different ways. What kind of genres that comes in, that's kind of secondary to us. Our focus in on experiences and the atmosphere of the games. And I have this kind of unique atmosphere and experience I want to convey, and I'm still searching for the perfect way of doing it. Empathy was our first attempt, and I would say it's a pretty successful attempt at conveying this atmosphere, but I want to explore alternative ways of doing it as well.
So you would say that story-rich games really are going to come and define the studio?
Not story-rich, but storytelling games. Because I would say that games like
I like the
Journey,
nuance.
games like Journeys, they tell you a certain story of the world, of its inhabitants, what happened to them, but they do so in a very subtle way. Journey is not a story-rich game. It doesn't have heavy amount of story in there. You won't find a lot of text. You won't find.
It's story-driven.
Yes.
Yeah.
There's lots of small details and nuances to the world which reveals the story to you, and that's what we find so interesting. Just playing around with ways of storytelling, not necessarily the amount of story, but the ways the story is told.
You're right. It's an important distinction between. You even have separate tags on Steam between they're story rich and then they're story driven, and one doesn't have to be the other. They're not mutually exclusive either, but they are very different things. So great, exciting, and it's exciting to me that you have the ambition to take the genre as a whole somewhere, that you're trying. If I'm understanding you correctly, Anton, innovation is something that you guys are wrapping your heads around in the way you process a story within an indie game.
Yes, we are exploring the ways of storytelling in the game. Empathy was one way of doing it. I mean, it's very story rich, as you said. There's lots of story. It's very story heavy, with lots of narration, lots of details to the story. But I also find interest in a different kind of way of storytelling, which is much lighter, such as, say, Journey or different similar titles. Which, for example, Fez is another interesting game which tells you stories.
I know
but
it,
it's not very content heavy on the story. You really need to nitpick the strange language the world has. You need to really understand it from the snippets that are scattered around the world. And it's an interesting way of, just understanding the story. But again, with Fez, it's not a story-focused game. It's a puzzle-focused game. So we want to continue making titles where the experience of storytelling is the main focus.
And is it being surreal something that you guys are not going to move away from?
Absolutely not. I mean, I love I love playing with players' mind, surprising them. If you open up our game and you know what to expect, basically we failed as developers in our mission that we set out for our own goals and our studio. When you open up Empathy, we don't want you to feel at home. We don't want you to know what the game will be about and how it will play. We want you to be, surprised and trying to understand the game. What happened? Like you are in this attic, which is suddenly at top of a ruined tower. Something happened and makes the player's brain try to understand and process it. So surreal and this kind of weird is something we definitely gonna stick to. But again, surreal comes in lots of different forms. It doesn't need to be, a mind-tripping experience. It can be surreal in its own new way. For example, Antechamber is very surreal and very special. I mean, there is no stopping and taking a break where you feel like, okay, I understood that game. It takes you from start to finish. It's a trip of surrealism in Antechamber. In Empathy, we have breaks between surreal environments and environments the player feels more at home with, such as in the park. Okay, it's a park. As soon as you go outside, oh wait, it's in the back of a giant statue. So we kind of shift there.
Yeah, great.
It's very good. I can't wait to see what you guys come up with.
Yeah, me too.
It's very exciting. This game is amazing, and I hope that everyone who's watching out there, you really have no idea what you're going to get into. You start in the beginning, and the end is just like such a surprise, really. You're going to enjoy it.
And also 2 thumbs up to Iceberg Interactive, they've been really active as a publisher of indie games lately. We knew them from Starpoint Gemini, the franchise, the indie franchise on the space games. Are coming out with their next game, by the way, Starpoint Gemini Warlords, on the 22nd, so rapidly approaching, I believe, May 22nd. Little Green Man Games, we're going to do a dev talk with them. And Iceberg Interactive is a publisher that's really releasing a lot of great titles this year, so we met them at PAX East. They're a fantastic team, and you guys, Anton, did the right thing by moving with them, because they're an ambitious young indie publisher, and it's not easy to find a good indie publisher nowadays. They're few and far in between, and the ones who know what they're doing are usually hard to find.
Yeah, definitely, because you always hear those horror stories about working as publisher.
Yeah, be careful.
It's not something we've experienced with Iceberg. It was a much different experience to what you probably prep yourself as a developer. It was a very pleasant cooperation with them, and they gave us lots of creative freedom as well, and extra time to just get the vision into the games that we really wanted.
Yeah, exciting stuff, Anton. I was glad to meet you. I was glad we got to do this interview. Lasea, Ariana, thanks much for waking up early, getting some coffee, and getting on the show. I also want to thank the audience, if anybody woke up on Twitch to come and watch us. Thanks to our loyal fans and followers. We'll also take this interview, Anton, in a couple days, if you'll give us the time to edit it and improve the quality so that it can go on YouTube, iTunes, and the website. You can follow us on opiniops.com and all the social media that comes with it. We'll be back on Twitch for the next Dev Talk, which I believe is next Sunday. We have two getting put together. One I won't disclose yet because I need to confirm it, but the second one is My World, with a British studio that I'm kind of excited to talk to them. They're in early access and they're putting together a competitive game, and we're always into competitive game. Also, watch this summer incoming our service E4I, Esports for Indie, which is going to bring the best of the competitive indie games onto Twitch for a regular stream of competitions between the most hardcore die-hard players. And we're excited about that getting really rolled out for I'd say July. And thanks to everyone for following us and enjoying the stuff that we work hard on producing every day. Anton, we wish you guys the best. We think you've got too much talent on board, and it's encouraging to see that the first. It's the first game, right?
Yep, so it was our first title. Started out as student title instead, and been production way too long.
Bravo for a first game. It's super impressive, and we're excited to see how the studio evolves. Like I was saying, it's encouraging to see. We see a lot of studios that after the first game say, we don't know, we'll see if there's money, if we still get along. You guys seem to be a tight-knit group that works well creatively and even from a business standpoint, because you picked a publisher, which is the right move. And we wish you guys the best. So
thank you.
Thanks for everything. Guys, we'll see you next time. We'll see you next Sunday on twitch.tv/opiniops online. And I will close the show if I find my tab. I did. Have a great one, guys.
Bye guys. Thanks.
Bye.